How's going guys, welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with inner and outer Moka? Part 3. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. Naruto stood back to his full height and turned around with a scowl directed straight for the woman who stood there with her arms crossed and numerous shinobi around her, 8, if he counted correctly. Don't get in my way, Tsunade. The alarms were still blazing, even as the Hokage gave the Jinchuriki a cold glare. You will not be leaving. Now get back in your room and maybe your punishment will be lightened. What a convincing argument. Naruto replied sarcastically as he took up a fighting stance with his left foot forward and his hands balled into fists. But I'm sorry, I'm leaving this place and going after Sasuke whether you like it or not. So that's the reason. Tsunade thought as the shinobi around her got ready for a fight. You have one last chance, Naruto. Don't bother giving me a last chance, I'm not going to make use of it. He shot back. Kurama, I'm going to need your chakra, I can't waste my time here on these people. The only response he got from the Biju was a sudden rush of power as his entire body lit up in a golden glow. Naruto shot forward from his spot, cracking the ground where he had been. When he reached the group of shinobi with Tsunade, 9 arms made out of chakra sprouted from his body and grabbed one person each and threw them away as if they were nothing but pests. He took immediate advantage of the situation and rocketed up the nearby staircase, ignoring Tsunade's shouts for him to stop. On his way to the top of the underground base, he encountered shinobi from all different villages that tried to stop him in his tracks, but they were dispatched easily enough. Finally, he reached the top floor of the base that was literally right under the surface, only he stopped and frowned when he saw who was standing in front of the stairs that led to a thick steel door. Are you going to get in my way as well? Naruto's cloak that appeared when he was using all of Kurama's chakra swayed behind him, while the high collar with 3 magatama on each side of it ruffled slightly when a cold breeze blew through the room, despite there being no connection to the outside. "To-san." The male flight attendant whistled a jaunty tune as he made his way from economy class through business class and straight for first class. He opened the door that led to the hallway which connected first class to the rest of the plane and walked in, not stopping his tune the entire time. He did stop his whistling though, when he noticed the state of the area. The trays and carts that had been stacked with mainly food and drinks had been sprawled everywhere, as if a drunk had stumbled through and managed to knock everything in his way over. No, that probably wasn't right. A drunk wouldn't have managed to knock everything over and push it from one end of the hallway to another. Looking over in the direction where everything had been sent to, the flight attendant felt his face lose some color when he saw what had happened to the emergency door. It was closed, thankfully, but there was a large dent in it, as if something heavy had crashed into it. That is a problem. Who the hell are they? As soon as Naruto's clone asked the question, he felt something from behind pull him backwards until his body collided with the wall and window he'd broken when he'd made his entrance. Probably shouldn't have broken the window. He murmured as he realized that he was being sucked out or was trying to get sucked out anyway. He managed to hold on by using his chakra and the natural strength that Senjutsu chakra gave him. This is definitely a problem. For all of you it is. The clone glanced up at the sound of the man's unconcerned voice to see one of the 4 he'd asked about looking at him rather smugly, but it was a different one that was speaking. We'll be fine though. He'd figured as much, if he was correct in his assumption that these guys were also Thunderbird like Kia, then they could fly and would easily be able to get out of the situation. Bastards. The loud screech came from outside. Thunder rumbled. The clone grunted before a plume of smoke erupted in front of him, revealing a perfect replica of himself. The newly created clone went through a few hand seals and slammed his hands onto the ground of the airborne vehicle, while the others watched on curiously, wanting to see what would happen. Kanji spread out from the replica's hand and traveled all across the room, covering the ceiling including the dent, floor, walls and windows. Even as every part of the room had kanji connected to them, they still moved, overlapping each other, until there was nowhere anyone could look without seeing them. Suddenly, the clone who had been all but a part of the broken window, fell back onto the floor. No more air tried to suck him outside into the dark and stormy clouds, no sound came from the other side of the plane. The clone stretched to get rid of the kinks that came with being in an uncomfortable position, while his replica vanished in a puff of smoke. Okay, let me repeat myself, who the hell are they? He pointed his index finger to the 4 who were still standing at the door. 2 small plumes of smoke erupted at the original Naruto's wrists as shuriken appeared in his hands before he put his wind chakra into them and hurled them at the hovering Thunderbird. The weapon sliced through the air in dark clouds, with the wind chakra given to them having extended their radius far beyond its normal size. Noticing the weapons flying towards him at relatively impressive speeds, Kia to the side of them and consequently further away from the plane. Shuriken kept appearing in Naruto's hands, and every time they did he'd put his wind chakra into them and throw them at his enemy while walking down the plane to stay in range, as the Thunderbird kept having to move to the side and away from the plane. These things are annoying. Kia thought before letting out a loud screech as he dodged another set of wind chakra enhanced shuriken. Thunder rumbled around them. Good. Naruto smirked when he noticed the yokai a fair distance away from the plane. He held his hand above his head, palm faced up. Chakra started to form in his palm and started to rotate in multiple different directions. The chakra became visible to the naked eye as Naruto started to pour more of his chakra into the technique until it formed sphere. It didn't stop there though, the already basketball-sized sphere of chakra kept growing and growing until its size was easily quintupled that of his own body. Kia seemed to realize how far away he had been forced away from the plane and gnashed his sharp teeth together before soaring straight towards the blonde who had a massive ball of something held just above his right hand. He paid whatever it was no attention though, all that was on his mind right now was completing the task he'd been set by his organization's division leader. And fly fast enough. Naruto got a sneer in return for his taunt. Maybe if you were more like I am. He disappeared from view as he used the Hiraishin marker on Kia's head to instantly appear there, causing said yokai to gain a shocked expression. You'd have had a better chance at surviving. The shinobi brought his hand which hid the massive sphere of chakra in it crashing down right where the Thunderbird's golden feathers met the beak. The Rasengan shredded the feathers and grinded through the beak with relative ease. Kia himself let out a loud and high-pitched screech of pain that caused a ringing noise in Naruto's ears as his head was forcefully pushed downwards from a perfectly horizontal to a 45-degree one, causing him and the one he was sent to kill to nosedive right underneath the plane. The Thunderbird fought to stay conscious while the sphere kept grinding into him. The golden feathered wings at his side went slack from not having enough concentration, along with the rest of his body, as he tried to keep his eyes open. Luckily for him, Naruto needed him alive for the moment, and as soon as the blonde realized that they had started free-falling, he cancelled out his technique and held on to the golden feathers tightly. The "we are" doesn't matter. The Thunderbird on the far right stated. He said he was a clone, so killing him would be pointless, and I doubt a copy of the original would have much power. His light blue eyes narrowed. He looks different from before though. Where did the blonde hair, yellow eyes and whisker marks come from? The only reason he could actually tell he was the same person that Kia had engaged was that whatever energy he had, something that all humans had, but usually only in minuscule amounts, was mostly the same, albeit to a smaller degree. I suppose you don't have to tell me willingly. The clone shrugged casually and closed his eyes as a beepy grin that suited his face rather well came into existence. It only means I have to beat every single one of you into a bloody mess. You think you could? The two quadruplets in the middle sneered at him in a challenging manner, while the one on the far right rolled his eyes and the one on the far left remained stoic. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. His grin dropped and his yellow eyes flickered over to his three friends who hadn't moved from their position for a brief moment. Sukun, Moka-chan, Kurumu-san, go and take a seat. This won't take long. But Sukun went to protest but stopped himself when Naruto looked at him and glared for nothing more than a short second. You're only going to get in the way. He could almost imagine the shinobi's voice telling him exactly those words. His fists clenched at his sides again. He knew he would only get in the way, but he needed to vent his anger, needed something to lash out at. The human glanced over at the corpse of the flight attendant and his frown deepened. Why? Why did she have to be killed? All she had been trying to do was escape. She probably had a family, friends, maybe even a lover that would miss her, too. And that yokai had just killed her without a second thought. But Naruto-kun, there's Moka started, cutting Sukun out of his rather depressing thoughts and bringing him back to reality. Moka. The vampire flinched slightly as Naruto hissed and interrupted her. Go sit down and let me deal with this. They came for me and only me, technically the boss, but that doesn't matter. The point remains that you don't need to get involved. She went to protest again, wanting to at least be of some use. He could take her rosary off. But he leveled her with a look that made her take an involuntary step back. His eyes, even though they had turned yellow instead of his usual blue, were still his, but there was something in them that she'd never seen before. Instead of the usual carefree gleam he had, they were hard, serious and cold. The red and slitted pupil that had remained on the girl's rosary sparkled with some interest. I didn't actually think he could take anything seriously. Even when he fought at the school, he seemed so carefree and unconcerned. What's different this time? Kurumu had seen the admittedly intimidating look he'd given Moka and decided it was best to listen to the blonde. Besides, if he really needed help she could just jump in, even if the one in front of them was just a clone. She placed a hand on Moka's shoulder. Come on, if he says he can handle it then we should believe him. Sukun took a deep breath and felt the anger he'd felt bubble up inside of him when the flight attendant had died was murdered. He corrected himself start to ebb away, even if the confusion was still there. The more logical side of his mind took back control, and he nodded at Kurumu's suggestion. Yeah, Kurumu-chan's right, Moka-san. Unconversing. Naruto's attention went back to the four identical yokai as his friends moved to the opposite end of the room. Yeah. He shifted into what most people would see as a lazy stance. Yeah, I am. They fell through the dark clouds. The thunder that'd been rumbling around them every so often had disappeared. It started to rain. Naruto held onto the golden feathers like his life depended on it. He stubbornly refused to let go. He needed to find out who Kia was working for. Kurama let out a snort. You haven't even been in this place for long, and yet you've already got an organization out for your head. Despite the situation, Naruto felt his eye twitch at the amused tone of his partner. You're hopeless, you know that. Naruto was silent for a few moments before he let out a sigh. I should have expected something like this. The creepy headmaster did say that there would have been others that felt my chakra when I arrived here. No, you shouldn't have expected something like this. Kurama shifted around in his spot slightly, his nine tails swaying behind him, as if they had nothing else to do. His tone turned into something akin to a teacher lecturing their student or even a parent scolding their child. Hell, maybe it was something that an older sibling would use on a younger one when they made a mistake. Naruto would never know. What you should have done was prepared for it anyway. Even when this yokai called you over to have a talk with you, you were still completely relaxed and unconcerned. IKN Naruto tried, but the biju wasn't quite finished yet. And now look at the situation you're in. The friends you made at that school are on their own with only a single clone of yours to protect them while you fall to the ocean below. As if to go with his words, they broke through another dark cloud and the ocean came into the blonde's view. You can't let yourself get overconfident, Naruto. Just because you're no longer in the elemental nations doesn't mean you can let your guard down so easily. The plain-sized Thunderbird let out what sounded like a rather pathetic whimper while Naruto remained silent for a good while. I'm sorry. He finally said to the being made of chakra. But I'll make up for it. I'm not going to let anyone else I care about die just because there's people coming after me. I'll obliterate this entire organization if I have to. They weren't far from the water's surface anymore, probably around 50 meters or so. Naruto prepared himself. He let go of the feathers and stood on just his 2 feet. 25 meters. He tensed his legs and bent his knees. 15 meters. With the immense physical strength granted to him by Senjutsu chakra, he was able to jump and counter the momentum he'd gained while falling, albeit with some difficulty. Kia, however, was barely holding on to his consciousness, and as a result he was sent plummeting into the water. Naruto noticed this after he'd landed on the water's surface and grabbed the golden feathered wing that was protruding out of the water with both of his hands before lifting the Thunderbird's entire body up and over himself, only to slam him back down on the water's surface, back first. The water kicked up around the Thunderbird's large form, forming miniature waves that rippled away from the yokai. The clone dashed along the carpeted floor of first class. A kunai burst into existence from the seal on his right wrist and he held it firmly. The 4 yokai that looked exactly the same hadn't moved an inch, but they looked ready for a confrontation. He reared his arm back and launched the kunai at them. That made them go into action. They separated, 2 went to the left while the other 2 went to the right, and the kunai embedded itself into the door they'd been standing in front of. The clone didn't stop, just changed directions and ran straight for the 2 who'd gone to the left. He reached them in just a moment and lashed out with a punch that was caught by one as the other Thunderbird grabbed his wrist. They severely underestimated his heightened physical strength while using natural energy though, and the one who'd caught his fist was sent rocketing back until he smashed into a window, breaking the glass while blood ran out of his now sideways nose. A sudden rush of wind came from the broken window, but the seal the clone had put up before quickly took care of it. The light blue-eyed yokai who'd grabbed the shinobi's wrist stared in bewilderment at him, only to find himself face to face with the carpet as Naruto had grabbed his own wrist and flipped him over. The clone brought its foot up before slamming it down on the back of the Thunderbird's head, resulting in a loud crack to reach everyone's ears as the body went slack. Almost done. He murmured before quickly jumping up and planting himself onto the ceiling, just in time to dodge a bolt of lightning that had been sent straight for his unprotected back. Did Naruto-san just dodge lightning? Sukun asked in disbelief while the hole that had been torn into the side of the plane by the attack was covered up again. I think so, Kurumu murmured unsurely as Naruto launched himself from the ceiling straight for his other 2 enemies. The 2 yokai stood perfectly still. Lightning sparked behind a pair of light blue orbs as Naruto's body came rocketing towards them. That's not going to work. The shinobi almost effortlessly twisted his body out of the way as a bolt of lightning whizzed past him, tearing another hole in the opposite side of the plane which was quickly dealt with. Even as a clone he's able to maneuver his body out of a lightning bolt's range. You're amused, becoming more and more interested with the human and the chakra that he used to fight, even if she'd never openly admitted. Now within range, he planted his hands on the ground and spun his body around so that his legs span around with him and aimed to land a kick to both of their faces. Biting back a scoff, one of the identical Thunderbirds simply tilted his head back while the other jumped away to create some distance, and it was a smart move on his part as he bore witness to the other Thunderbird's face contort into pain as if he was struck by an invisible force before he was sent sailing back and sent through the wall to the outside. The powerful force tried to pull them out almost instantly, but it quickly disappeared as Kanji swiftly crawled over the humanoid-size hole that had been created. Is it really possible for humans to actually do this? Sukun thought in awe, his feelings over the flight attendant's death forgotten for the moment as the clone disappeared from view, only to reappear behind the stoic-looking yokai. Lightning crackled behind his light blue eyes as he stared at the human behind him. Unfortunately for him, even though he was only fighting a clone, he was far too slow to get his attack off before a hand was wrapped tightly around his throat, dangling him in the air and consequently severing the concentration he'd had on his attack. Naruto's yellow eyes glared straight into stoic light blue ones. The Thunderbird didn't lose his stoic expression, even as the clone choked him until his body went slack and his conscious mind left him. The body dropped to the floor and the clone glanced at the friends of his creator while his eyes returned to their normal state and color. He's unconscious, as well as the others, I still need them alive. For now anyway. At the end of his sentence, his eyes glazed over slightly, as if he was remembering something before he shook his head and a small poof of smoke originated from his wrist. Naruto made his way over to Kia's head and glared straight into the half-lidded and somewhat glazed over eye that was closest to him. What's this organization that you spoke about before? PRGL, ERG. Can't speak properly. The blonde faced his palm up into the air where another Rasengan began to form. Maybe another one of these will help. A brief flicker of fear flashed through the twin light blue orbs as the defeated Thunderbird remembered what the technique had done to him. He gurgled some more, probably on his own blood. 1. Don't bother. The spiraling sphere of chakra grew in size. The way I see it is you either give me the answers I seek and die painlessly, or you don't, and I slowly grind this into every part of your body, slowly killing you in the process. That was a lie, he wasn't sadistic enough to do something like that. Then I can just go and nicely ask your comrade or comrades that are up in that plane. The sound of metal clashing against metal reached the shinobi's ears as Kia grinded his teeth together. The silence wore on for a good 10 seconds before Kia made his decision as the light in his eyes began to get dimmer. If he was going to die then he sure as hell wasn't going to go out without screwing over the ones who'd sent him on this task. Fairy tale. Fairy tale? Naruto repeated, blinking slightly. What a bizarre name for an organization. Even the Akatsuki had a meaning behind the name Nagato, Yahiko and Konan had chosen. Who specifically stopped himself when he noticed the light blue eyes lose any life they had left while a choked breath escaped the Thunderbird's giant form. He sighed, the giant sphere of rapidly rotating chakra dissipated and his eyes returned to normal. The name of it isn't much to go on, but maybe whoever else is up in the plane will know. A small plume of smoke erupted next to the blonde to reveal an exact replica of himself, only for the copy to disperse the same way a second later. He waited a moment until he felt it, a light tug on his chakra, as if something was calling out to him. He disappeared while the Thunderbird's giant corpse began to sink in the middle of the ocean. Sukun looked at the tri-pronged weapon that Naruto's clone had embedded in the ground with interest. It was the same one, maybe not the exact same one, but still that the blonde had shown him the day Kurumu had entered their little group. At the time, Naruto had said his father created it, but he'd also implied that it did something other than the obvious. A human would be lying if he wasn't curious as to find out what it could do. Boy was he surprised when Naruto, the real Naruto, suddenly appeared out of nowhere right where the kunai was, crouched down with the same carefree and nonchalant smile that was usually plastered over his face, quite the contrast to what his clone's expression was before. Glancing up at the replica of his friend, Sukun noticed that he had also lost the cold expression he had been wearing and was instead smirking at Kurumu and his own stunned expression, while Moka just blinked a couple of times. Yo. The blonde greeted with a wave as his smile widened slightly. His clone disappeared, and in his momentary daze of pushing the sudden influx of new memories away to sort through later, he didn't see the blur with pink hair barrel into him, sending both sliding along the carpeted floor. You're alright, and you're not a clone this time, or at least I hope you're not a clone, she rambled as she laid on top of him before babbling incoherently about how relieved she was to see he was okay. Naruto flushed slightly at the feeling of her fists pushing up against him before chuckling. I didn't know you had such little faith in me, Moka-chan. The vampire let a small smile cross her face at Naruto's joking tone before his body shifted slightly. You think you can get up, Moka-chan? I thought you would have enjoyed her laying all over you like that. Naruto's face got brighter and Kurama grinned. Quite. When Moka had gotten off of him, Naruto walked over to the yokai who'd been choked into unconsciousness by his clone. He flipped the slowly breathing body over so that he was on his back before planting his hand on his chest and sending a rush of chakra through the unconscious body. The Thunderbird jolted up so fast that Naruto had to actually move his head out of the way so he didn't get his head smashed by the yokai's own. The usually stoic-looking light blue-eyed male's expression was pained, as if something was going through his body and killing off his own existence from the inside. Naruto didn't have any time for sympathy, so he grabbed the collar of his leather jacket and slammed the Thunderbird in disguise back onto the carpeted floor, causing a short gasp of pain to escape his fellow blonde. "What do you know about fairy tale?" Sukun gained a weird expression on his face as he witnessed the blonde's sudden change in demeanor. First, he's all serious, and then he's back to his casual self, only to go back to being serious again. What was up with his friend? He shook his head to clear himself of his thoughts and brought himself back to what Naruto was doing to a clearly injured person. "Naruto-san, what are you doing?" Demanding information. The shinobi spared a glance at the other human before bringing his glare back to the yokai's pained expression. "Don't make me repeat myself. I'm not going to say anything about fairy tale." He spat back as his hand grabbed at Naruto's wrist in a vain attempt to force the blonde to release the blonde's grip, with his eyes glaring straight back into Naruto's with clear defiance. "Well. Would what?" Naruto interrupted. "He wouldn't do anything, or more like he can't do anything anymore. He's dead already, sinking to the bottom of the ocean." Along with the unnamed yokai, Sukun's eyes widened at the implication. "Naruto-san, don't tell me you." "Yeah, I killed him. Or more like I was the cause of his death," Naruto replied, referring to the fact that while he hadn't attacked Kiyu while he was drawing his final breath, the yokai only died because of him. Sukun gained a scowl at his admission. The anger and confusion he'd felt before once again rising up within him. Sure, he didn't know this Kiyu and that he was more than likely the one who'd gone after Naruto, but even so, he'd been alive as well. Why would you do something like that? Moka and Kurumu decided to stay silent as it seemed like a discussion that the two males needed to have on their own. While Moka never liked people dying, she understood yokai like herself. Even though Naruto was a human, it was basically in their nature to kill others for whatever reason they have. Kurumu wasn't very fond of it either, but she wouldn't let the deaths of others affect her, so she was pretty much indifferent on the matter. Sukun, on the other hand, was a human and had been raised by his parents as such. He hadn't been around any deaths besides funerals of family members he hadn't been all that close to in the first place, much less violence to the point of breaking bones and such. So Naruto guessed that his anger and confusion on the matter was pretty justified. He hadn't grown up as a shinobi either, whose lives revolved around death and violence. Hell, if there was ever a day that someone didn't get killed back in the elemental nations, people would start to get unnerved, as if they had a feeling the ground was going to suddenly swallow them whole, or that the sky would suddenly start cracking until it caved in on them, or you get the idea. Later, Sukun. Naruto didn't loosen his grip, even as a pain that he was rather familiar with entered the yokai's eyes, and it wasn't from Naruto's chakra in his system. "You're lying." The yokai gritted out, the grip he had on Naruto's wrist loosening. "No, I'm not," Naruto said coldly. "And you'll follow him to the grave if you don't give me the answers I'm looking for." He gestured to the other two blondes, one lying face down with a small pool of blood around where his face was planted into the carpet, and the other one in a heap near a broken window that was covered up by the seal his clone had placed. "Or maybe if you won't answer, those two will." The Thunderbird's expression hardened. "I won't let you touch them," he snarled, lightning crackling behind his eyes in anger. "Then give me the answers I want." Whatever grip he'd had on Naruto's wrist slackened as his hand fell back to the carpeted floor, followed closely by his head. "Fine." He sneered at his sibling's murderer. "I don't know much about it though, Kiyu was the only one who actually joined them, we just kind of came along." "Tell me." "All that I know is that Kiyu worked under a man named Miyabi and that there's 7 divisions in the organization." He sighed, his eyes glancing over at his defeated siblings with some concern. "That's all my siblings and I know." Naruto let go of the man's jacket and stood up with a sigh. He despised himself at the moment for taking away someone that was obviously precious to the yokai, but he didn't exactly have a choice in the matter. "Grab those two," he gestured to the Thunderbird siblings with a wave of his hand. "And get out of here. I don't ever want to see any of you again." His fellow blonde grunted, the feeling of something trying to wipe him out from the inside suddenly disappearing. While it greatly confused him, he let it be and grabbed his siblings before making his way to the human-sized hole that had been created when Naruto's clone kicked his other sibling out of the plane. He doubted his brother was dead, he could fly after all. After the stoic he'd regained his usual expression upon standing up Thunderbird had left with his siblings, Naruto trudged over to one of the cream-colored seats and plopped down in it. "We'll talk later," he called out to the others as he relaxed himself. I don't know about you three, but I'm tired after that ordeal. Wait a minute, Sukun began, glancing at the numerous holes that had appeared during the fight between Naruto's clone and the Thunderbirds. What about all of these holes? Don't worry about them. Naruto replied. The seal my clone put up will act as a barrier to keep the outside of the plane separate to the inside, so long as I keep my energy flowing through it. The black-haired human nodded a bit hesitantly, not really knowing whether he should trust kanji which were floating over the holes that been a result of the fight. He decided to in the end though, as they had been doing a pretty good job so far. Fine, but I want some answers later, Naruto-san. Naruto sighed. Yeah, we'll talk later when we get settled in at Vegas. Once everyone had went and sat down in one of the cream-colored chairs again, Kurumu turned to Moka, doing her best to avoid looking at Sukun's still somewhat angry and confused face. Hey, Moka, what type of yokai do you think Naruto-kun is? She asked as she'd never seen a yokai do all the things that Naruto could do before. Sitting on an identical and equally comfortable chair right next to the succubus, Moka turned to look at Kurumu with a slightly uneasy smile. I don't know, Kurumu-chan. I haven't asked him. Oh, come on. The blue-haired girl pouted. You suck his blood all the time, you must know what he is. Sorry. She apologized, not liking how she was lying to Kurumu, but she couldn't tell her that Naruto was a human. But I really don't know what he is. Kurumu sighed at not getting an answer she would have liked, but accepted it and rested back into the chair. He patted down his leather jacket and black loose-fitting pants, before scratching he'd sighed at the time, before he flew straight towards the place he'd heard Kia murmur about when he mentioned something along the lines of Jauro-sama and promotion. He knocked on the double doors to the mansion rather loudly, making sure to get whoever was there to come to the door and answer. It didn't take long before he heard the sound of footsteps and the door opening. Is there something you need? He gulped slightly, unnerved by the man in a butler uniform with red, slitted eyes. Only one race had eyes like that, vampires. Sorry for the intrusion. He tried to put as much sincerity into it as possible. But I need to speak to Jauro-sama, it's business. The butler grunted, looking displeased as he fixed him with a distasteful look, even as he moved out of the way to allow him entrance. After closing the door, the butler started walking down a hallway, muttering all the while. To think that Jauro-sama would ever allow such a low-level yokai into the Shuzen manor. The aforementioned yokai glared at the back of the vampire's head while he followed, as if he was trying to burn holes through it with just his eyes. Technically, he could do something like that, but he wouldn't dare to do something like that to a vampire. Arrogant fassholes. They came to a stop outside a wooden door. Enter. The blonde blinked a few times, rather surprised at the feminine voice that came from the other side of the door. Never mind that, how did she even know someone was out here? That guy didn't knock or anything. Without showing any signs of hesitation, the butler obeyed the woman's voice and opened the door, walking inside first as he saw no need to be polite to what he saw as a weak yokai. Jauro-sama. The butler greeted, bound to the back of a chair that someone like an emperor would be seated on, which was facing a widescreen TV hung up on the wall. There is a yokai here that claims to have business with you. The chair turned around slightly, and the Thunderbird was able to get a glimpse of red, slitted eyes and a head of light blonde hair. I already knew that he was here. She regarded the other vampire in the room coldly. Are you questioning my detection abilities? Of course not. The butler replied a bit tensely. Then leave. You know where the door is. The light blonde hair and red eyes disappeared from his view as the butler obediently made his way out, unaware of the sneer that the weaker yokai had sent at his back. What are you here for? Well, Jauro-sama, he started a bit hesitantly before building up his courage and straightening up. You sent my brother Kia, a member of the 1st Division I believe, on a task to assassinate a man named Naruto. He said, remembering what the blonde's friends had called him. Jauro didn't reply. She didn't personally send people on assassination missions with the exception of Akua and Kawa, she just ordered one of the division leaders to send someone to do the job. Ah, she remembered who she wanted killed, apparently he was called Naruto. She'd sensed an absolutely massive burst of some sort of power right from the comfort of her own home some time ago. She could tell it wasn't Yoki fairly easily, so she had ordered the 1st Division leader Miyabi to take care of whoever it was. She didn't want any variables or unknowns interfering with her plans. If you're here, then I'm guessing that your brother failed in his task and was killed. She asked, glancing around her chair to see his reaction, which was a small, almost hesitant nod. She growled silently to herself. Failure wasn't accepted. Well then, seeing as he's already dead, then I guess you'll be the one to take the punishment in his stead. What do you Maya? Before he could even finish speaking, he coughed up some blood and looked down to see an arm going through the right side of his chest. His eyes traveled up from the arm, ignoring the gladiator-like shoes that he saw out of his peripheral vision, to the slim and athletic body covered by a short black dress that went down to mid-thigh until they stopped on the cold and slightly sadistic eyes of Jauro. I won't accept any failure to be around my organization. She smirked, twisting her arm that was in his chest around, causing a grunt of pain to escape him. When there is failure, it results in punishment. She finished before wrenching her arm to her own right, slicing straight through his ribcage, spine and heart. Looking at her arm, she let out a tsk. To think that I'd have dirty my own hands with the blood of such a pathetic creature. She sneered at the corpse before calling out for someone to take out the trash. The rest of the flight had been silent most of the way. Moka and Kurumu had both tried to speak to the two boys, Sukun had managed to make small conversations with them, but Naruto had told them he wasn't in the mood for talking when truthfully he was thinking over the information about fairy tale he'd been given. Currently Naruto, transformed back into Tsukun's uncle, was staring at a flight attendant that had just all but demanded to know what happened to the room. His eyes turned red with 3 tomo slowly swirling around the edge. What are you talking about? There's nothing wrong with the room. The flight attendant's expression became dull and expressionless. I'm sorry sir. He apologized in a monotone, bowing to all 4 of them. I must have been imagining things. If you would follow me. Customs had been fairly easy to get through, just a routine check, really. Even though the people there had given Naruto in disguise a weird look for taking just a backpack, they'd let them pass as Naruto had informed them they were just there for the weekend. When they'd gotten out of the airport, Sukun had waved over a taxi. Where to? The taxi driver asked Sukun's uncle as he looked to be the oldest there. The Monte Carlo, please. Naruto replied with a smile before flashing a wad of cash he'd been able to exchange at the airport. Make it quick, too. It was just before 10 am when they'd arrived outside of the Monte Carlo. After Naruto had paid the correct amount with a little extra to the taxi driver, he got out and the boot of the cab opened to allow them to grab their things. Once they'd all taken a hold of their things, they set their sights on the giant building that was the Monte Carlo for the first time. Naruto's arms fell limply at his side, while his mouth opened in shock as the taxi drove away behind them. That building is absolutely massive. I thought that you said you were in Tokyo, Naruto-san. Sukun commented, his eyes glinting in amusement at seeing the usually carefree blonde gobsmacked. He'd pushed what had happened on the plane out of his mind at the moment in favor for settling in first, like Naruto had suggested in the first place. Buildings like this shouldn't be much of a surprise to you. It needs to be more. Moka began, pushing her bottom lip out in a pout at the building they'd be staying in. More like the dorms at school. Naruto gave her a deadpan look, Sukun shook his head while Kurumu nodded her head, agreeing with the vampire. It's just too what's a good word for it. Bright. Well, sorry to disappoint. Naruto said, tone and expression still deadpan. But not everything can look like it came out of a horror movie. Moka crossed her arms, pouting even more than before. But Naruto-kun, buildings in horror movies have a lot of dignity and character. Don't make it sound like they don't. I totally agree with you. Naruto shook his head and suppressed a chuckle, ignoring the way Moka stuck her tongue out at him for his sarcastic remark. Well, let's go then. That depends on the answer I'll receive. Minato's statement was accompanied by the cold breeze disappearing. The answer to what? Naruto asked, frown deepening in confusion. What will you do if you find Sasuke dead? Naruto's answer was firm and was formed without any hesitation. Kill whoever killed him. Minato sighed, his body shifting into a ready stance with his only hand going into his weapons pouch located at his lower back. Then my mind is made up. I won't let you go anywhere. The younger blonde wasn't very surprised when he felt Kurama's chakra leave him. Both his father and him had a half of the Biju within them, and neither of the beings wanted to fight the other lest they destroy a majority of the landscape and draw Obito and Madara's attention. If Naruto and Minato were going to fight, then they were going to stay well away from it, no matter the situation. Naruto shifted into a similar stance. Then I'll just force my way through. You can try. Almost immediately after he'd finished his sentence, Minato flashed out his hand and flung a bunch of his signature tri-pronged kunai until they embedded themselves in different parts of the top floor of the underground base. I won't be holding back, though. Good. Reddish-orange pigmentations formed around Naruto's eyes as his pupils became horizontal and bar-like, while his irides turned yellow, the markings of a sage and proof of the natural energy flowing through his body that he'd been gathering the moment he set his sights on his father. I'd be insulted if you held back. The aura of a sage really is intimidating. Minato mused, remembering one time when he'd witnessed Jiraiya use it against his old teammate Orochimaru. He smirked, pride for his son bubbling up inside his chest. And Naruto's more intimidating than Jiraiya-sensei was that day. Naruto, always the impatient one, blasted forwards from his position with a kunai held in his hand. The metal of his kunai clashed against his father's own tri-pronged one in a small shower of sparks. They didn't stay mobile, however, as Naruto had built up a fair amount of momentum, and with his far superior physical strength, he was able to push Minato back, sending them both sliding along the concrete floor until Minato's back connected with the wall. Taking advantage of the situation, Naruto's other hand balled up into a fist before it was sent rocketing straight towards his father's face, only to have the older blonde completely disappear from his eyesight. Unfortunately for the Yondaime, who had reappeared behind his son with a kunai aiming to slash a tendon in Naruto's arm, the Jinchuriki had immediately turned around and smashed the back of his fist against his face, sending him rocketing away until he impacted with another wall. It didn't really matter in the end though, his body had been revived by the Ito Tensei, and as such, he didn't feel an ounce of pain. Another advantage of him already being dead was that his body would regenerate any injuries aside from ones inflicted by Obito, so the rather large chunk that had been taken out of his face from Naruto's hit had already began to piece itself together. Naruto wasn't prepared to let that happen though, he rocketed off from his position with a kunai ready to slice his father's limbs off. In the end, the older blonde would regenerate any and all body parts in due time, so it didn't matter how much damage Naruto inflicted upon him. The standard shinobi weapon was inches away from embedding itself into the blonde's shoulder, which still had an arm attached to it when Minato disappeared in the same manner he had before. "You're not going to beat me like that, Naruto," he sighed, turning around to face his pseudo-live parent. "I know that," he said before lunging forwards once again. Naruto frowned, staring at the black shirt and jeans he'd just put on distastefully. What the hell was up with this world or timeline? He was wearing some casual clothes as the forceful woman at the clothes store had called it, before she told him she wouldn't let him wear orange that he'd gotten when he was still in Tokyo. The others had gone to their own rooms to shower and change clothes. The widescreen TV hung up on the wall that the bed was facing was turned on and had the news on. There has recently been abductions in the city of Las Vegas. Police are saying that these abductions are at complete random, with the only people that have been abducted being foreign. According to recently acquired information, these abductors could very well be in league with slave traders. In other news, a recent plane that has come in from Japan has supposedly had major damage done inside the first-class area. Ah. He glared at the clothes as if it was their fault, only somewhat listening to the news. "Why can't you be orange? I didn't pick you for the type to care about what you're wearing." "I don't usually, but this is different," Naruto said, speaking out loud as there was no one else in his private hotel room. "There's absolutely no damn orange in sight. It's outrageous. Disgraceful." His eyes burned with a hidden fire as his glare intensified on the clothes. "These clothes are something that damn Sasuke would wear. I hate him." Rolling his eyes at his partner's dramatics, Kurama planted his chin on his human-like hand. "Oh, stop whining." He smirked. "You wore too much orange in the elemental nations, so maybe this is just giving the other colors a chance to shine." "Black doesn't shine." He snapped back, flustered. The blonde huffed before stalking over to his backpack and wrenching it open before plunging his arm inside. When he brought his arm out again, he held an almost exact replica of the shirt he was wearing, only it was blue. Better than black. He grunted as he changed shirts, oblivious to Kurama shaking his head and sighing. Naruto had just slipped his arm through the sleeve of his shirt when he heard what sounded like a quiet argument in Japanese outside of his room. Opening his door, he saw Sukun and Kurama a few doors down the corridor right in front Sukun's door that led to his own room. The human was frowning at the succubus, while said blue-haired girl had her arms crossed under her bust with a frown on her face. "Why does it matter so much to you, Sukun?" Kurama asked, oblivious to Naruto watching them. "What do you mean what does it matter to me?" Sukun bit back quietly so as to not draw attention to them. "That woman died up there, do you not care at all?" "No, not really," Kurama replied, worsening Sukun's mood. "Should I care though? It's not like I knew her or anything." "It doesn't matter whether you knew her or not. She was still alive, wasn't she?" "Yes, she was, and now she's not." Sukun gritted his teeth. "Then what about the yokai that Naruto-san killed? Do you care?" "My answer is the same, Sukun, I don't." "Then what about Naruto-san?" Sukun asked heatedly. "He killed someone. Doesn't that bother you?" Kurama sighed. "Sukun, yokai kill other yokai all the time. It's a common occurrence, so no, Naruto-kun killing someone doesn't bother me in the least. But Naruto-san is a human." He wanted to shout in frustration, but kept his tongue. "Fine." He stalked down the corridor towards the elevator as they were near the top floor. "I'm going for a walk, I'll be back later." "Wait, Sukun." She called, but the elevator doors had already closed. Why is this bothering him so much? She hadn't been expecting an answer, but she got one anyway, delivered by one Jinchuriki with blonde hair. Probably because he hasn't ever witnessed death before. Naruto said in Japanese as he casually made his way over towards the succubus, taking in what she was wearing for the first time. A white blouse with a short light blue skirt same color as her hair, he noted. How would you know something like that? He stopped walking in front of her and shrugged. I took a guess. She gave him a flat stare for a few moments before shaking her head and sighing. Let's stop talking about death, it's making me depressed. She said before looking up at him curiously. By the way, what did you do to that flight attendant earlier this morning? I was sure we were done for when he came in. He leaned against the wall, tilting his head to the side slightly as he tried to figure out the best way to explain it without giving too much away. It was in his nature, well it wasn't always, if he had been any younger he'd have bragged about it until everyone got bored. An illusion. He finally said, causing her to look at him more attentively. I'm not very good at them, never have been, but I can use it against people who aren't mentally prepared to an extent. It's a good tool for getting information out of someone as well. She tilted her head to the side. If it's a good tool for getting information out of someone like you say, then why didn't you use it on that yokai to ask him about that fairy tale organization? It wouldn't have worked. He said. Like I said before, I'm not very good with illusions, and I can only use them on people who aren't mentally prepared for it. Actually, you didn't say you could only use it on people who aren't prepared for it. Details. He waved off. Anyway, as I was saying, that yokai was prepared to not let out any information about fairy tale, and so it wouldn't have done anything other than waste time. That's all you're going to say? Do I need to say any more? He arched an eyebrow at her. Don't tell me you expected me to go into an extremely long explanation that would take too long to read. Read? I meant listen to. He got off the wall, and Kurumu brushed off the wrong choice of words on his part. I'll talk to Sukun later. Right now he probably needs some time alone to think. So, try and enjoy the rest of the day. Sukun was walking down the concreted sidewalk just outside of the hotel he and his friends were staying at with a small frown on his face. Why does Kurumu-chan not care about lives? Even Moka-san didn't seem bothered that much by the murder, and Naruto-san, he sighed and leaned against a nearby wall. I'll make sure to talk to Naruto-san later, but right now I need some time alone, otherwise I might end up snapping at him. Hey. Sukun looked around for where the sudden voice had come from and understood that it spoke in English. Over here. The human's head stopped going from side to side when he saw a middle-aged man with brown hair, some stubble and a cigarette in his mouth leaning against the wall right next to him with a deadpan expression. You took your time looking when the entire time I was right next to you. Sorry. Sukun said in English with a thick accent. I've just got a lot on my mind right now. Is that right? The man smiled, the cigarette in his mouth curving upwards at the action. Ah, you kids these days. Always got some sort of problem going on. Whether it's family, girls, friends or even just issues with yourselves. Sukun didn't say anything. So what's your problem? The black-haired human hesitated. Why was he talking with a complete stranger? What'd it matter to you? It came out harsher than Sukun would have liked, but the man just smiled and blew some smoke out of his mouth. What does it matter to you? He corrected. You can call it curiosity. He shrugged, shifting his position on the wall slightly. Or you can call it practice, whatever floats your boat. Practice? MHM? He blew some smoke out of his nose. I'm a psychiatrist, or that's what they like to call me. I mainly deal with teenagers such as yourself. Another puff of smoke escaped his lips. So, do you want to talk about it? If you want some privacy then we can go in there. He pointed to the Monte Carlo with a jerk of his thumb. I'm pretty close with the guy that works there, so I'll be able to get a private room for us to talk. I don't think. Ah, come on. The man's smile became gentler and more calm, putting up a very good image of a trustworthy person. It won't take long, and you really do seem troubled. Have a talk with me and you can get it off your chest. Sukun chewed on the inside of his cheek. Why was he still talking to this guy? He didn't even know him, but the idea of getting everything out of his system did sound appealing. Even then though, what the hell was he supposed to say? Oh, I witnessed a murder and later found out one of my friends killed someone while my other friends don't care. Yeah, real smart. The man would either think he was insane or he'd call the police. Come on. The man said, dropping his cigarette on the ground and crushing it underneath his shoe. Even if you don't want to talk about it, speaking about something else will take your mind off things. Sukun sighed as the man started to walk away towards the Monte Carlo. He got off the wall and trudged after him. Maybe speaking with him would take his mind off things for a while. Besides, the psychiatrist seemed like a nice enough person. Hapuchu. Naruto sighed, wrapping his arms around the pinkette to hold her steady, sending an annoyed look towards the succubus that was looking amused. You know, Naruto remarked just after Moka let out a rather content moan and pushed her body more into his. If I was average, you'd have sucked me of all my blood multiple times over by now. In response, Moka just bit down deeper and started sucking his blood at an even faster pace, probably being spurred on by the fact that she knew he wasn't anywhere near what most would consider average. When she'd decided she'd had enough for the moment, she detached her fangs with a blissful sigh and a rising blush, her arms still strung around his neck. It was torture having to be on that plane for so long without your blood, Naruto-kun. I'm sure it was. He said with a roll of his eyes as they untangled themselves from each other before he gave her a small pat on the back. What he received from the vampire wasn't something he expected. Her mouth opened and a small burp escaped. He blinked a few times before his mouth parted into a grin. Did you just? Kurumu covered her mouth with her hand to stifle her snickers. Moka's cheeks darkened and she noticed that the marble floor of the corridor they were in was rather interesting while she fiddled with the hem of the sundress she was wearing. Maybe. Just a little, she mumbled. There's no need to be embarrassed. He said, grin widening in amusement as if he was silently snickering over her embarrassment. He coughed to regain his composure, even if he still looked amused and spoke in Japanese. So did the two of you want to go get some food? I haven't eaten since that dinner we had on the plane. Kurumu nodded. I'm pretty hungry as well. She said. What about Sukun though? We can't just leave him on his own. Don't worry, he's still in the hotel, Kurumu-chan. Naruto assured as the skin on his neck finished weaving itself back together. Like I said before, he needs some time alone, we'll meet up with him after lunch. The succubus hesitated, not wanting to leave her destined one on his own, but eventually agreed after Naruto assured her that he could sense the human and that he was fine. After a small discussion of where to eat, they ended up on just getting room service at Moka's insistence. They all sat in a circle-like formation on Naruto's bed with an open box of pizza in the middle. Naruto had his legs crossed under him while Moka and Kurumu sat on their knees. Naruto took a bite of the pepperoni pizza he held in his hands and shot Moka a look. Why aren't you eating, Moka-chan? You're the one who wanted to get room service. Kurumu glanced at the pin cat out of the corner of her eyes as she took a chunk out of her own slice, having a gut feeling as to why. Well, she fiddled with the hem of her dress before placing her hands in her lap and staring straight into the shinobi's blue eyes. When you were fighting those yokai on the plane, you mentioned something about fairy tale. Naruto put the last part of the slice of his pizza in his mouth. What is fairy tale? He swallowed the food. An organization. He said, glancing between the two yokai, only to see both looking at him expectantly. One that would probably prefer to see my head on a wall as decoration, than have a nice conversation. Kurama rolled his eyes. Moka fidgeted slightly, not really knowing how to feel about the cold glint that appeared in his eyes at the mention of fairy tale. Okay. She said. How long have they wanted to? No idea. He said casually, a contrast to what his eyes were displaying. I only just heard of them after I'd fought that yokai. Do you at least know why? Naruto shook his head. Not in the least. He half lied as he grabbed another slice and took a bite. Why does it matter though? It's my problem and I'll deal with it accordingly. She frowned at his response. You're saying that as if you'll take on the entire organization yourself. I will, if they keep coming after me. He swallowed the bite he'd taken. Like I said, it's my problem and I will deal with it. I'm not going to let anyone else, my friends especially, get hurt because there's people coming after me. Then that's why you're amused. At least he's not dragging my other self into his mess. So that's it? Moka asked. You're just going to brush us aside like that so easily? He arched an eyebrow at her. Brush you aside? He asked, taking the last of his slice and swallowing it. I'm not brushing anyone aside. All I'm doing is taking care of my own problems. Kurumu got off the bed, feeling fairly awkward. I'll see the two of you later. If you want to catch Sukun, you better be quick. He's going towards the front door. Naruto offered despite not wanting her to go as her presence could hold off a potential argument. The succubus nodded gratefully at his words and left the room without a word while he turned back to Moka. Why does it matter, Moka-chan? To you, I mean. Do you really need to ask that question? She didn't break the eye contact they'd held up. We're friends, aren't we? Isn't that reason enough for it to matter to me? He hid a grimace. Why did his problem have to be similar to the one he had in the elemental nations? It just made it worse that Moka was trying to get involved, like how his now deceased friends had. Maybe it is. His eyes narrowed slightly. But that doesn't mean that I'll let you get involved in my problems. Why not? I want to help. Her frown deepened. You have an entire organization after your life and you want to deal with it accordingly. I can't really say anything as I don't know what you're fully capable of doing, but you won't be able to deal with it, as you said, on your own. She grasped her rosary lightly and looked down at it. So please, at least let Yuri-chan and I help. Yuri-chan? My other half. Dottie sighed, a frown coming onto his face. If she was going to be persistent, then he'd have to be a bit harsh and twist what he actually believed around. He just hoped she wouldn't be too upset afterwards. Moka-chan, she looked back up at him, and he steeled his resolve. It's nice that you are willing to help me out, but in this situation you would only end up getting in my way, even if your other half was unsealed. She gasped audibly, her eyes went wide open, and her lip trembled slightly at his harsh words. The other side of the pink-haired vampire, though, had a different reaction. The rosary flung itself out of the girl's grip, and a red, slitted pupil glared furiously at the once again carefree-looking blonde. Not only did he say something cruel towards her other half, which was most of the reason for her fury, but he actually dared to question her strength. Even going as far as to say that she'd only end up getting in his way. Naruto blinked as the rosary trashed around for a while before settling back down in its original position, the red and slitted pupil still glaring at him. Is that, she bit her lip in an attempt to stop it from trembling. Is that really what you think? He wanted to say no, he really did. He hated that hurt look she was giving him, but he pushed on. He couldn't let her get involved, only to get killed, just like all his friends from the elemental nations. It is. She slid off the bed and stood up before walking out of the door in an almost robotic-like fashion. Naruto sighed once the door closed and slumped back against the bed in his hotel room. Sorry, Moka-chan, but the best way to keep you and everyone else safe is for you to not get involved. Are you sure you want to do that, Naruto? He hesitated a bit before answering. Yeah, I am. If I have to repeat those lines to Kurama-chan and Sukun, then I will. They may end up not liking you anymore. What will you do then? Do you really need to ask that, Kurama? You already know the answer. He placed his hands under his head as a makeshift pillow. If they end up disliking me, hating me even, then I'll endure it. I'm a shinobi, you know. It turned out that the psychiatrist's friend wasn't there, so the both of them had settled for simply getting some food at the food court and speaking there. Currently, the duo were seated at one of the many tables, quite a fair distance away from the other people in the area. Sukun took a bite out of the cheeseburger he'd bought from the nearby McDonald's, which had been paid for by simply adding the cost to the bill he'd receive on his credit card. He did feel a little guilty that he was basically eating food that Naruto unknowingly paid for, as Naruto was giving him the money that would be charged to his credit card only in cash, but he pushed those thoughts aside. So the brown-haired man started, taking a few chips out and chowing them down. Do you want to talk about what's wrong with you, or something else? It's not that there's something wrong with me. The black-haired human said, accent still thick as he spoke in English. It's my friends. And well, he began, attempting to come up with the right words. My friends and I saw someone beaten the other day, and while I was angry and confused at the fact, my friends didn't seem to mind at all and just watched. He devoured another bite of his burger before frowning at his next sentence. Then one of my friends beat someone else up, albeit in self-defense. He knew it was lame, but what else could he say? He certainly wasn't going to say that instead of beatings, they were real deaths. Okay. The middle-aged man ate a few more chips. I think I see what's going on here. He pointed a chip he grabbed at Sukun. You're not used to much violence, are you? When the younger male shook his head, he continued. And from what you said before, your friends seem to be used to, or at least relatively familiar with violence. He ate the chip that had been pointed at Sukun, as said human finished the rest of his burger and moved on to his own chips. As for your friend who beat someone up, well, can you really blame him? If it's as you said, then it was in self-defense, and he had every right to do what he did. If only you knew that Naruto-san actually killed someone, then maybe you'd say something else. Sukun thought, swallowing the chips he'd been chewing on and for some reason starting to feel somewhat sleepy and lightheaded, but he tried to ignore it. Yeah, I guess you're right about the last one, but what do I do? He rubbed his eyes and forced back a yawn. Did you have an argument with any of your friends? Sukun nodded slowly in response, his eyes beginning to droop. Then I suggest you apologize to anyone you argued with and, try to speak to them about the situation. He said, seemingly oblivious to Tsukun's sudden drop in awareness. To start off, I guess you could saw. Tsukun's eyes rolled back and his head collided with the table's surface with a rather loud thud, while the chips he'd been holding fell out of his hands and were sent sprawling over the floor. Hey, the psychiatrist said, shaking Tsukun's shoulder lightly and looking worried. Hey, kid, what's wrong? When he got no response, he sighed and picked the boy up before carrying him piggyback style. He looked around the food court and saw most of the people there staring at him strangely. He put on a polite smile. Nothing to worry about, he's just tired. I'll get him home and to bed. The other people in the court either shrugged or just returned to what they were doing before, leaving the middle-aged brown-haired man to smirk to himself as he made his way out the front of the Monte Carlo hotel. Kurama sprinted back to the elevator she had come from, her footwear colliding with the marble floor rather loudly in her mad rush. Who was that guy with Sukun? she thought, remembering how the mysterious man had picked Sukun up and claimed that he'd be taking him home to bed, even though her destined one didn't live in Vegas. If this wasn't the human world, I'd have been able to protect Sukun myself, but I can't reveal my true form here. She reached the doors of the elevator and pushed a nearby man out of the way to get in quicker. She repeatedly hit the button to close the doors. Sorry. She apologized in English with a thick accent. The man she had pushed scowled at her and shouted. What the hell was that for? The doors closed, muffling the shouts that had come not long afterwards. I need to tell Naruto-kun and Moka. She murmured in Japanese, tapping her foot anxiously. Naruto-kun can sense Sukun, so he should be able to tell where he's going. Why? Moka thought, lying down in her hotel room on the bed she'd been provided. Her arm was rested over her eyes, which had tears building up in them, but she refused to let the liquid travel down her face. Why did he say things like that? Would I really just get in the way if Fairy Tail ever attacked again? The frown that marred her face deepened slightly. Well, I never did anything on the plane when those yokai were there, so maybe I am just a burden. She gripped the rosary hanging around her neck firmly and gave it a light, almost desperate tug. Maybe he wouldn't think of me as such a liability if I could take the rosary off myself. Ira sighed, having calmed down somewhat from the words Naruto had said before. She could see what he was doing. He was deliberately trying to make her other self think she was weak and would only trouble him if Fairy Tail ever came around again so that she would be out of harm's way. However, just because she understood and wasn't planning on telling her other half didn't mean she wasn't going to give the blonde a beatdown for putting Amit. It was still weird calling her other self that, but she was managing in such a state. Hey Amit, she said, gaining the Pinket version of herself's attention. What are you doing just lying around and moping? Forget about what Uzumaki said for now. Go find the succubus and do something. That's the reason you came to Las Vegas with the others, isn't it? She sat up and rubbed her eyes, sniffling slightly. Yeah, it is, but what? She demanded. You came to the human world with your friends to have fun, so go and have fun. It'll be awkward around Naruto-kun, though. Then don't go anywhere with him. She said flatly. That succubus and other human are still there, it's not like Uzumaki is your only friend. She grunted. So get up, go find those two and do something other than feeling sorry for yourself. Okay, she wiped at her eyes again and put on a weak smile. Thanks for that, Yura-chan. If you hadn't have said anything, I probably would have just stayed still. She didn't get a reply. When Moka had closed her hotel door behind her, she saw Naruto coming out of his own room with what was a convincing visage of nonchalance, but she managed to see the worry that had entered his eyes. Hesitantly, she took a few steps in his direction and called out to him. Naruto-kun, what's wrong? Just follow me. He beckoned her to the elevator and she complied, taking note of the urgency that had entered his tone. What was up with that sudden surge of panic coming from the bottom floor? And why is Kurumu-chan coming back up here? What happened? The duo reached the elevator just as it dinged and the doors opened, revealing a panicked and worried-looking succubus. Kurumu-chan, what's wrong? He asked quickly, not knowing whether the panic he'd felt coming from below had been from her or someone else, but upon seeing her face he got a gut feeling that it was the former. Sukun. It's Sukun. She exclaimed, grabbing both of their arms and hauling them into the elevator before pressing the button for the bottom floor. What's wrong with Sukun? Naruto asked, feeling the anxiousness basically rolling off the succubus. Well, Kurumu started, taking a deep breath in an attempt to calm herself down. After I'd left your room, Naruto-kun, I went to the bottom floor looking for Sukun. I found him eating at the food court, only he had someone else there with him. What did he or she look like? It was a male, middle-aged, maybe around 35, with brown hair and some stubble on his chin. She answered before continuing. Anyway, I sat down at a nearby table because it looked like they were having a private conversation when all of a sudden Sukun's head collided with the table he was sitting at. She shifted slightly, sending a small glare at the elevator doors. At first I just thought it was because he didn't get much sleep on the plane, but then I saw the man Sukun was speaking to pick him up before declaring, and I quote, nothing to worry about, he's just tired. I'll get him home and to bed. Okay, Naruto started before the elevator dinged again and stopped while the doors opened. On the other side was an old pompous-looking woman dressed up like someone who was going to a wedding for royalty with an employee beside her looking annoyed as he carried her luggage. Naruto simply pushed the button to close the doors, ignoring the infuriated shouts of the woman and the sigh of the worker. I can still sense him, so he's not that far away. Don't get your hopes up though, his signature is getting further and further away rather quickly. The elevator dinged one last time as the doors opened to reveal the bottom floor of the Monte Carlo. The trio jumped at the opportunity and ran out of the elevator through the crowds of people, shouting sorry. And excuse me. Every so often. Once they'd barged through the doors and with the two women following him, Naruto immediately headed to the right, onto the sidewalk, past the city center and across the road until they reached the interstate that was blocking their way. Naruto made his way through the shrubbery that was in between the interstate and the road behind them and urged the other two to follow him. Come on, Sukun's signature is coming from this way. We need to get across. You're making a joke, right? Moka asked hesitantly, gazing at the numerous cars that were whizzing by them. Nope, I'm being completely serious. He said before glancing at Kurama. Are you going to be alright? Absolutely. He couldn't tell whether she was being sarcastic or not, so he just shrugged before grabbing Moka's hand. We need to get across, he trailed off, waiting for the right moment when they could make a dash, not noticing Moka's frown that had appeared when he grabbed her hand. He even has to hold my hand for something like this, I really would just be a burden to him. Ready? The shinobi glanced at his two female friends, getting a nod from Kurama and a squeeze of his hand from Moka. Now. Moka tightened her grip on his hand as all three of them ran across the busy road, jumping the barrier that was in the middle before resuming their task. Then I guess I need to prove to the both of us that I won't be a liability, Naruto-kun. Two brown eyes that belonged to a certain human attending Yokai Academy groggily opened and took in the surrounding area slowly. His ankles were chained to the brick wall beside him, but there was enough length on it that he'd be able to move around a good meter or two. In front of him were a row of vertical iron bars with only two going horizontal above and below what would be the center. He was still wearing the blue jeans and white shirt he'd been wearing, but they were ripped in some places. He shifted around, turning his gaze to the other side of the cell he was in to see a bed much like the one he found himself on. Well, it couldn't really be considered a bed, really. It was just a thin and dirty mattress that had probably been used by multiple other people before. What grabbed his attention though, was the person lying down on it, snoring lightly and without a care in the world. It was a girl maybe around 6 or 7 years old. She had shoulder-length brown hair, a small frame even for a child, and she was wearing light brown, messy rags as clothing. Am I in a jail cell? He wondered, sitting up from the mattress he had been laid out on, grunting slightly at the stiff back he'd apparently received. He hadn't actually seen a real jail cell before, but he'd seen them in some movies where the main character was a criminal and gets sent to one that he later breaks out of. How did I even get here? The last thing I remember was talking to that psychiatrist and then I felt really tired for some reason. Hello? Sukun's head snapped from the iron bars over to the direction of the soft, gentle and slight scared voice of the little girl. She was sitting up with her legs underneath her and rubbing her eyes. Who are you, mister? He shifted his body until he was sitting cross-legged. My name's Tsukune Ono. His shoulders slumped, a frown coming onto his face as he noticed how underfed she looked. What's your name? She stopped rubbing her eyes, letting Tsukun see that they were a deep and innocent blue. She still seemed a little frightened by him, but was more relaxed at his gentle tone than before. I am. She furrowed her eyebrows together, as if she was trying to remember. I don't know. She frowned for a second before perking up. The mean people here call me slave though, does that mean it's my name? No, it doesn't mean it's your name. Sukun replied quietly, not really knowing how to feel. Actually, no, disgust was probably the best word to use in order to describe how he felt. Disgusted whoever these mean people were. How long have you been here for? She tilted her head, her brows furrowing in concentration once again. Why do you say it like that? She asked. There is no other place than here, is there? He clenched his eyes shut, fists trembling as they rested against his thighs. Did she really think that this was the only location that existed? By the way she was talking, she did. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. There was no reason to get angry right now and end up startling the girl. Yes, there is other places other than here. Within the blink of an eye, the brown-haired girl was sitting in front of him on her knees, her hands clasped together as if she was praying while her blue eyes sparkled. Will you tell me about these other places? She asked excitedly. He blinked a few times, baffled by the sudden movement and rise in excitement. Sure, I guess so. He put on his best smile while trying to hide the disgust he felt for whoever put the girl in the cage he found himself in. It seemed convincing enough for her though, her face practically lit up like a mobile sun. However, before Tsukun could continue speaking to the small girl, a cold and cruel sounding chuckle reached his ears, followed by the sound of footsteps reverberating off of concrete. At the sound, the brown-haired girl visibly flinched and backed away from him and went back to her mattress. Well, it seems as if our new guest has decided to awaken. Sparks flew in the air as metal clashed against metal, fists met body parts, and chakra was thrown around as if it didn't even matter. Alarms blared in the background as the father and son duo fought each other, one trying to subdue, while the other was attempting to cut up the other into multiple different pieces so that he'd no longer be in the way. He grunted, spinning around on his heel and planting his foot into his father's stomach, only for said blonde to once again vanish in that infuriating way he'd done so many times before. It doesn't matter, I'm getting used to it. Minato firmly held another one of his kunai in his hands. He'd seen it, an opening. He lunged, the kunai he held slicing through the air as it aimed straight for Naruto's outstretched leg. The younger blonde hid a smirk as the weapon drew closer and closer to his knee until it was embedded there, going straight through the bone. Even with his sage mode, Naruto was still able to feel the pain that had came with the attack, but he pushed past it, his father was prone to attack. During their fight, Naruto had noticed that his father hadn't wanted to hurt him much, just enough to subdue him and make sure he couldn't move for a while, so naturally Naruto took complete advantage. He kept his leg held horizontally, not daring to move it lest he snap the kunai and have a piece of metal stuck there. His hand lashed out, grasping his father's throat in a death grip. He knew it wouldn't last long though, if anything Minato was evasive. So with that in mind, he squeezed with all of his might, trying to ignore the surprised expression of his father, until the Ito Tensei body gave in and the Yondaime Hokage's head was removed from his body. A burst of smoke erupted beside the blonde, a kunai also sticking out of its knee, but the replica bluntly ignored it as he slowly removed the tri-pronged weapon from his creator. Naruto grunted as his copy finished pulling out the kunai and Kurama almost instantly got to work on repairing the wound. His foot softly landed on the ground again and he tried his best to ignore the dull pain as he limped over to the decapitated head which was slowly regenerating its body. "It looks like I win, too-san," he said with a small triumphant smile. Surprisingly or unsurprisingly depending on where you're from, the decapitated head of Minato spoke without even a trace of pain in his voice. "It seems that way." Naruto sighed, the dull pain in his knee starting to fade. "You know, I think that you assumed incorrectly before." Two blue eyes that were much like his own turned to him. "Yeah. When you asked what I would do if I found Sasuke dead." He turned away, slowly trudging up the staircase towards the thick steel door. "The reason I was going to kill whoever killed Sasuke wouldn't be because of revenge." He reached the first step and planted his foot on it, almost able to feel his father's eyes staring intently at him. "It would be because Madara and Obito need to be erased from existence if this world is ever going to progress." Moka and Kurama huffed simultaneously, bending over and planting their hands on their knees, trying to catch their breath while some beads of sweat ran down their slightly flushed faces. "The two of you really aren't in shape." In the same simultaneous manner, the both of them turned their heads to the side and gave an almost identical dirty look at the blonde who made the remark and, much to their ire, seemed completely fine and unaffected by the long sprint they just had. How long had they ran anyway? A mile? 2? It didn't matter. Their exhausted minds were probably over-exaggerating the distance. Having caught enough breath to speak, Kurama stood up straight and wiped the bead of sweat off her forehead, an action that Moka followed not long afterwards. "So, where are we?" Naruto shrugged. "No idea." His eyes traveled over the immediate area. They were in a large field of short and somewhat dry grass, to their left was what looked like a small area filled with sand, and there were trees grouped together in some areas. Behind them were a row of admittedly expensive-looking houses that they'd just trespassed to get into the area. In an area with grass, trees and holes of sand. Kurama just sent him another dirty look for the lame reply. So Moka started somewhat apprehensively, not really knowing whether she should get in the mildly fuming succubus's way or not. "Did we stop her for a reason, or?" Naruto nodded, stuffing his hands in his pockets while his eyes traveled over the place. "Yeah, Sukun's here." "Well, he non-committally tapped his foot on the grass-filled ground a few times. "Underground, but you get the idea. Sukun wasn't the only one down there was probably another 8 or so chakra signatures. He was just glad they were all human. Which means that there's some sort of entrance nearby that he need to find, right?" Moka inquired, glancing at the blonde. "Well, yeah, that or we could always dig." Judging by the looks he got for his comment, they'd be looking with their eyes. He internally groaned, he couldn't even use his clones. When someone imagines an underground jail cell, they'd usually picture a dark, dank and overall dirty place that no one would ever want to be near, let alone inside of. That's not the place that Sukun found himself in, however. Instead of having a horrible feeling to it, the place actually felt homely. The temperature was warm, it didn't smell like multiple animals had died in the area and actually held a faint scent of lavender, it certainly wasn't dark and instead was well lit. The walls outside of his cell were made out of wood. He wasn't a designer of any sort, but even he knew that the concrete floor really didn't fit in with the walls with intricate designs on them with paintings hung up. Despite the fact that he was seated on a dirty mattress and was looking at a downright harsh-looking woman, yes, woman. He actually felt inferior, as if he didn't deserve to be in such a place. Shaking it off, he took in the features of the woman who had just chuckled in a way that made him want to cringe. She had long flowing black hair that reached her shapely hips, long, smooth and creamy legs and an overall athletic figure. Her face was slightly rounded with a pair of deep and harsh blue eyes. She wore a pair of black biker shorts, accompanied by running shoes and a white tank top. If it wasn't for the cruel smile that was planted on her face, then Sukun probably would have claimed to her to be a very beautiful woman. Gulping slightly as he was intimidated by the woman who looked to have just had a morning run, he decided to ask the million-dollar question that was on his mind right now. Who are you? Who am I? The woman mused aloud, her eyes twinkling with slight mirth. Who I am doesn't matter. She placed her hands onto her hips, her eyes traveling from Sukun over to the little girl on her mattress that refused to meet her gaze. Her face broke out into a vicious and cruel grin. My, you're still as pitifully fearful as ever. The girl flinched at her tone but stayed silent. What do you want and where am I then? Sukun was quick to drag the woman's attention away from the girl and back over to himself. Her eyes bored into his with an almost sadistic gleam, as if she was imagining what she could do to cause him pain. She bent over, her arms resting on the horizontal bars of the cell with her ankle crossed over the other. Sukun's eyes almost instinctively flickered from her face to the more revealed cleavage before they went straight back up again. The woman noticed though, and her small, yet slightly crazed grin grew just a tad wider. What I want is for you to listen, obey and be silent. She rubbed her thighs together and a deep, long and almost pleasured breath escaped her lips. As for where you are, that bit of information isn't needed in that brain of yours. He frowned at her response but decided to keep on talking. What do you mean by you want me to listen, obey and be silent? If anything, the grin on her face seemed to widen, as if that was the exact question she wanted him to ask. That should be obvious. She arched an eyebrow at him. I didn't think you'd be an idiot when he brought you in here. He? Sukun inquired, brushing off the insult. Wait a minute, you don't mean that psychiatrist? So that's what he told you? She chuckled almost silently to herself. It slowly got louder and louder until she was holding her stomach with tears in the corner of her eyes, full-blown bellowing laughter coming out of her mouth that echoed around the cell and hallway. Sukun stared at the woman strangely as she calmed herself down and wiped her eyes. She got back into her earlier position, only her grin was a lot larger and her tone was mocking. My, how naive you are. What do you mean? What I mean is he lied to you. Plain and simple. She chortled with laughter again. What did he say to you? That he was a psychiatrist that was willing to help young teenagers with troubles. He hasn't used that one for a while. Sukun frowned at the implication. You mean that he's kidnapped people like this before? Plenty. She stopped leaning on the iron bars and spread her arms out wide, as if she was trying to show how many people he'd captured. Of course it's not always the same story. Sometimes he pretends to be a doctor or a lawyer, or like other times when he goes around acting like a government official, that one really caught my attention. So bold, so daring and so dangerous to masquerade as someone like that. Why is he doing it? Why? She was more than willing to answer any questions about the man, it seemed. Because he doesn't have a choice in the matter, honestly. She waved her hand in the direction of the small girl. You see the resemblance, don't you? Sukun's head whipped around the small brown-haired girl and squinted his eyes as if he was studying her further. How didn't I see it before? Their eye color is different, but their hair color is exactly the same. Wait a minute, she said she didn't even know her own name before, just how long has she been here? His head came rearing back to the woman with a glare. You mean you're forcing him into it? Oh no, dear, you've got it all wrong. She giggled, a soft melodic sound that really didn't suit the grin on her face. Forcing him would be me holding a gun to his head and telling him what to do. I'm simply bribing him with her life. Her tone became challenging. Now, see if you can find out who her other parent is. His frown deepened into a scowl, while his eyes glanced from the girl to the woman on the other side of the cell. The both of them have almost identical eye colors and facial structures. Don't tell me. His eyes widened slightly and the woman grinned wider. I see you figured it out, she exclaimed in a sing-song tone before calming herself down and letting out a content sigh, her grin dying down into a small smile that still held the crazed quality to it. Ah, well, you've provided with enough entertainment for now. She turned around and started to make her way down the hallway with a small spring to her step, missing the weight Sukun's fists clenched. I'll be going now. You probably won't see me again, as the next time you wake up you'll be far away from here. When the sound of her footsteps had disappeared along with her form, the brown-haired girl got up from her position and once again planted herself in front of Sukun, an ecstatic and excited smile on her face. So can you tell me about the other places that you spoke about before? Sukun shifted until he was sitting cross-legged and placed his hands in his lap while looking at the girl. Does she not know that her own mother was just here? He thought sympathetically before giving her a small, slightly forced smile. Yeah, I guess I can. But where to start? Naruto sighed as he trudged along the grass, his currently red eyes with 3 tomo in them going from one side to the other. The trio had decided it was best to split up in order to search for an entrance to get to wherever Sukun was. It was times like these that he idly mused on the fact that despite all the training he'd received, he'd never really been taught how to track someone down, just the basics. Sure, he could sense Sukun's chakra along with the multiple others that were underneath the ground, but that wouldn't help him find an entrance. This is so tedious. He passed what looked like a small lake. And this place is so strange, too. I mean, who creates something that has such short grass with small areas filled with sand, small lakes and holes that have flags in them? Humans, probably. Not in the mood. He got a snort and rolled eyes from the Biju. More sand, grass, water and irritated grumbling from the blonde later, Kurama decided to speak up again. I wonder if you'd start searching faster if you had a team of nearly naked women cheering you on. Kurama. Naruto's face burned as he pictured exactly what his partner had said. Despite there being no one else around him, Naruto felt the need to cough and regain his composure. Don't put that into my head again. And why not? He could almost picture the grin that the Biju was wearing. I'm sure you liked it. After all, you're more like your godfather than you like to admit. I'm not like Hiro-senin. Not in the least. You keep telling yourself that, brat. His eye twitched. Kurama only usually called him a brat when he was purposefully trying to rile him up. Before he could make a retort, something came into his vision directly in front of him. However, just because it was straight in front of him didn't mean that it would have been easy to spot for anyone that didn't have anything to enhance their eyesight. Sneaky. Just not enough. He mused as he made his way over to it, pushing the tree branches and shrubbery out of his way. Once he'd made his way through, he crouched down on one knee against the many leaves and sticks that littered the ground he was on. Jutting out of the ground, the camouflaged lever stood just centimeters above everything that surrounded it. He grabbed it and pulled towards himself with a decent amount of strength. Light, muffled and almost undetectable whirling and clicking sounds reached his ears. Once the small sounds had stopped, the sticks and leaves just ahead of the lever started to shake before they slowly began to part away until it revealed a steel staircase going down. Despite it being well lit, easy to see down and with his Sharingan though, Naruto couldn't see the bottom of the staircase. He groaned and pinched the bridge of his nose as his eyes returned to their usual color. Great. Just what I've always wanted. He pulled the lever back and the entrance slowly shifted back into its previous position before he stood back up and started walking in the direction he felt Kurumu's Yoki, as she was the closest, at a sedate pace. When he arrived, he found the succubus looking frustrated as she walked along the grass, her head slowly going from side to side so she didn't miss anything. Kurumu-chan. He called once he was within range. She turned to look at him as he made his way over with an eyebrow raised. Found it. She perked up, her frustration seemingly disappearing. Really? Where? He rolled his eyes. You're way too eager. He said before turning around and walking in the direction he felt Moka's Yoki, the succubus walking in step beside him. We need to find Moka-chan first, you know. Then what? That should be obvious. He stuffed his hands in his pockets. We go in, beat up anyone in the way, find Sukun, and then kick the guy hiding behind his lackey's ass. Why does there have to be someone hiding behind their lackeys? It's common sense, Kurumu-chan. There's always a final villain hiding behind everyone else, no matter what happens. Why does it have to be a guy then? It doesn't, I guess. It's just what came to mind first. Females can be considered guy in this instance, right? She deadpanned. No, definitely not. As soon as they had found Moka, Kurumu had figuratively and in Moka's case literally dragged the two of them in the direction of the entrance that Naruto had found, only going the right way thanks to Naruto telling her the way with a somewhat amused tone. He bent down one knee again and pulled the lever towards himself. The same light and muffled whirling and clicking noises reached his ears before the sticks and leaves started to part until the steel staircase was once again revealed. Is that it? Moka asked, peering down the well-lit staircase. I'll admit, I was expecting it to be more dark. Kurumu nodded along with the vampire's words. Naruto rolled his eyes again. Don't be so cliché. He began to walk down, his shoes making light sounds as they connected with the steel steps. Moka and Kurumu shared a glance before they followed after the blonde. Not everything underground has to look like it belongs at Yokai Academy. He said before mumbling. Or in a horror movie for that matter. That's hypocritical. Kurumu deadpanned. You're telling us not be cliché, but you told me before that there's always a final villain hiding behind their lackeys. Naruto just huffed. Slightly louder and less muffled whirling and clicking sounds reached the trio's ears as they descended in a single file line. Behind them, the entrance closed up, seemingly of its own will. There wasn't much to look at as they made their way down, just the light bulbs that hung from the slanted ceiling every 10 meters or so, the steel stairs and the equally shiny walls that the light reflected off. Naruto made a face. All this light and the shiny walls are going to drive me insane. I'm sure you'll survive. He could almost picture the half-hearted and reassuring smile Moka was giving to the back of his head. If Kurumu-chan and I can deal with it, then you can too. He spared a glance behind him at the vampire without breaking his stride. What do you mean by that? What I mean is that yokai naturally prefer the dark over light, she said. So, if we can tolerate it, then you can without any problems. But Naruto-kun's a yokai as well, Moka-chan. Kurumu piped up and Moka hit a wince at the way she'd phrased her own sentence. So he should be in the same situation as us, right? Yeah, of course. The bottom of the stairs revealed itself, accompanied by quiet noises that sounded like a man mumbling. Naruto slowed his pace and looked at the two girls behind him and whispered just loud enough for them to hear, but quiet enough so that his voice didn't echo down the staircase. Make sure to be quiet. We might be able to catch whoever's there off guard without any trouble. He glanced down at the steel stairs and all 3 pairs of shoes. In fact, it'd probably be better if we took our shoes off. Then we won't make as much noise on these steps. After some annoyed grumbling from Kurumu and a pout from Moka, the trio were back to making their way down the stairs, their shoes held in one of their hands. Naruto stopped on the bottom step before peering around the corner which had been on his left when he was still moving. The room itself was in the shape of a rectangle, with the stairs the trio were on at the bottom left. The floor was made of a dark gray carpet, accompanied by wooden walls with intricate designs, with an assortment of paintings hung up. At the very top and top left of the room were comfortable-looking leather chairs and a couch, all being black in color. In the middle of the room, a brown table stretching around a meter long was set up. To the very right of the room in what would be the middle, was a corridor that led to who knows where. On the black, leather couch at the top of the room, a man could be sitting. His head that was filled with brown hair was hung down, and he had his hands clasped together over his legs, and he was mumbling. Please God, let this be the last one. What does he mean by that? Naruto mused. I suppose it doesn't matter right now though. He held his hand up to the 2 girls behind him and mouthed for them to not move. A quick hand seal later, and Naruto's form shimmered out of existence, stunning the 2 teenage yokai. Moka sniffed quietly. His sense gone, too. Naruto slowly stalked across the carpet towards the man with his head hung down, making sure to not make any noise to bring the man's attention to him. That could be disastrous. The closer he got, the louder the man's mutterings became. I don't want to do it again. I just want her back. Naruto disregarded his words, and as soon as he was in range, he wrapped his hand around the man's neck tightly enough that it would take away his ability to speak, but leave him with enough air to survive on. Even if his breath started to come out in short ragged breaths. You will forget the previous 20 minutes and the next 20 minutes for the rest of your life when I let go of your throat. Naruto commanded in English, his form coming back into existence with his Sharingan swirling and locked onto the man's eyes. Now that he didn't have his head hung down, Naruto was able to make out some stubble on his chin and realized that he looked around 35 years old, exactly what Kurumu had said the one who'd taken Sukun looked like. The man's eyes became dull and the hands he'd used to grasp at Naruto's wrist in a futile attempt to get the blonde's hand away from his throat dropped to his sides. Moka-chan, Kurumu-chan, you can come out now. He's not going to cause any problems. The aforementioned yokai walked onto the dark gray carpet, their respective shoes now worn back on their feet. When had they even put them back on, and why? He barely even remembered taking his own off. Maybe it was just a woman-like thing to do. Moka was the first to speak. Naruto-kun, how did you do that? What? Turn invisible. Maybe I'll tell you sometime, but not now. He turned his attention back to the fake psychiatrist and loosened his grip slightly, missing Moka's pout at being denied information. Where is Tsukune Ono? When he didn't get a reply, he took it as a sign that the man didn't know Tsukun's name. Where is the teenager that you abducted not long ago? The reply was brought to him in a flat monotone. He's in the cell area. Where is that? At the end of the corridor. Anything specific? When he once again didn't get an answer, he let go of the man's throat and let the body fall back onto the leather couch in a heap before turning around to face the vampire and succubus. Well, let's get going then. Where? Where else? Naruto shot back to the succubus as he made his way to the corridor before walking down it, the other 2 falling in step beside him. Unlike the room they just left, the floor of the corridor was concrete instead of carpet. Oh, right, I should probably, definitely. He stopped walking and slipped his shoes back on so that his hands were free of the burden. Kurumu rolled her eyes while Moka just shook her head. It only took a few minutes for the trio to come to the end of the corridor. What they found at the end of it though made Naruto's face twist in annoyance. The room was in the shape of a perfect circle with 4 corridors, each one having a large letter above it. Directly in front of the trio was the corridor with the letter N above it, to their right one had the letter E, the one to their left had the letter W and the one they'd just come out of had the letter S. The floor was made out of the same concrete they'd been walking on, the walls were painted gray, while the roof had a painted-on compass. North, east, south and west. Moka said, observing the room, bringing both Naruto and Kurumu's attention to her, as they both knew she was probably the smartest out of all of them. They're cardinal directions like the ones you'd find on a compass. She directed her attention to the roof. Though that should be pretty obvious going by the painting. Yes, right, of course. Naruto said lamely, having not even thought about it. Though it probably had to do with the fact that he'd never even used a compass before. Well then, where do you sense Sukun coming from, Naruto-kun? Kurumu asked. That way. He pointed at the end corridor. But these corridors could twist and turn, so it doesn't really matter which one we take. We're all going to have to split up then. Kurumu suggested. Luckily there's 3 of us, so we can all take a corridor on our own. Moka nodded, agreeing with the succubus, while seeing it as an opportunity to show Naruto that she wouldn't be a burden. If anything came up, that was. Yeah, we'll all go down one to try to find Sukun-kun. Naruto pursed his lips, not liking how they were suggesting on going off on their own in the enemy's den, but didn't argue on the matter. They weren't babies that needed him to hold their hands, after all. Alright. He agreed. Naruto-kun. Moka dragged his attention over to her. Take off my rosary. He didn't argue, feeling a little better that her other personality her name was while she was sealed, he reminded himself was going to come out. When he reached over to grab the item, he could have sworn he saw the red and slitted pupil that had appeared seconds before gleam maliciously. As soon as the rosary came off with a clink, Moka's body started to change, her hips, bust, eye color, hair color, and even her expression. What Naruto hadn't expected when it was removed though, was the extremely hard slap that sent him rocketing away until he collided with a wall right next to the corridor that had the N above it. Kurumu blinked and a small sound of surprise escaped her mouth. He groaned, rubbing the side of his face where he'd been hit as he pulled himself out of the Naruto-sized crater that'd been formed from his body. Okay, maybe I deserved that for what I said before, but did she have to hit that hard? It really stings. Get up, Uzumaki. Moka ordered, her voice cold. He knew that she usually spoke that way, but this time it had an undertone of fury that made Naruto shiver and not in a good way. When he had gotten back to his feet, she gave him the frostiest glare he'd ever seen, one that could have even made Madara pick up his gun by and walk away at the sight of it. I believe you have some apologizing to do. And not just to me, to my other half as well. I am sorry. He said. He'd never really been known to deal with an angry woman. When he saw her crossing her arms with if it was even at all possible her glare intensifying, he babbled out an almost incoherent set of words that roughly translated into. I'm sorry, but it's not exactly the right place to do this. Can we speak later? She grunted and turned towards the corridor that had the W above it before she began walking. I expect you to put a lot more effort into it than that, as well as a decent amount of blood. When she had left their sight, Naruto dropped onto his backside and pouted. She's going to drain me dry. He said miserably before sighing and slowly standing back up. You go down that one, Kurumu-chan. He pointed to the corridor that had the N above it. I'll take the east one. Yeah, alright. The corridor Naruto went down really wasn't different than the one they'd used to get into the room. His shoes collided and made soft noises against the concrete as he strolled through it. The walls were the same, just with different paintings on them. Before long, Naruto came to a sharp left turn. Instead of simply walking around it, he peeked around the corner with his back to the wall. Sure enough, just like he had sensed, there were 2 men standing at attention right next to a steel door that looked really out of place on the wood walls. Both of the men had messy black hair and were wearing clothes that would pass as casual in the timeline he'd found himself in: jeans, a shirt, shoes, you know. Their expressions were a mix between annoyance and severe boredom as they stood there, their arms crossed. Strapped to their thighs were almost exact replicas of the weapons that Naruto had seen the 2 uniformed men back in Tokyo. Weapons that the people of this timeline, world or whatever use. He mused, slightly interested in what their effectiveness would be. His breathing increased slightly as well as his heart rate, while he felt excitement well up inside of him, and a small smirk came to his face. Well, let's see what they can do then. He walked around the corner and shouted to the 2 men in English. Hey, beep heads, over here. Almost instantly, their 2 heads with black mops on the top of them jerked in his direction with clear surprise on their faces. They calmed themselves and stood beside each other, blocking any way for the blonde to get through. The one on Naruto's right grabbed the weapon strapped to his thigh and aimed it at the blonde, the other man with a mop for a head following his actions a moment later while fumbling the weapon slightly. Who are you and how did you get in here? The one on the right demanded, his index finger pressed tightly to the trigger, ready to pull it at any given moment. Naruto kept his pace towards them. Ah, straight to the point. Naruto mused aloud as he shook a carefree hand in their direction, the gleam in his eye making the one on the left nervous. Who I am doesn't matter, really. But as for why I'm here, I guess that'd be to rescue a friend and take care of anyone in my way. His words made the one to his left get a nervous bead of sweat to trail down his face. The man on the right, however, had a different reaction. His jaw tightened, his face hardened, and he sneered at the blonde. Well then you're out of luck, he said, his finger twitching. Because we've been told to kill anyone that enters here. Then why did you waste him? Naruto stopped himself mid-sentence, and a kunai popped into existence before it flew towards the man on the right, just as said human pulled the trigger on his weapon with a loud bang. Not even a second later a metallic clang rang out through the area, and Naruto's kunai fell to the ground. Wow, would you look at that? Naruto mused aloud. Those weapons of yours aren't half bad. The man on the left dropped his gun in surprise as he stared at the Jinchuriki, awe and fear shining in his eyes. His equally stunned partner shook it off quickly though and sent another round of bullets at him one at a time. Another few metallic clangs reached everyone's ears and Naruto's arm fell back to his side. Man, if I couldn't see you pulling the trigger I'd probably be dead already. Well Naruto's attention went to the man with messy black hair to his left. You're kinda supposed to be already dead. Now, Naruto said, now within 5 meters of the two. Do you really think I'd be stupid enough to just walk out into your sights if I wasn't confident I would still live afterwards? Maybe. Naruto rolled his eyes. Well, I only have one question for the two of you. Are you still going to be in my way, or do I get a free pass? You know, like the ones at. Of course not. The man to his right snarled, nostrils flaring as he fired another bullet, which got intercepted by another kunai that clanged to the ground a second later. He tried to pull the trigger again, but was rewarded with the sound of empty clicking. Oh? They're broken already? Naruto inquired before sighing. Well, I did give you a chance, I suppose. Before they could even question his words, they found the same knife-like weapons that had stopped the bullet sailing straight through their eyes. The kunai tore straight through their pupils, lens and optic nerve, before it made its way into their brain, tearing through their brain stem and cerebellum, before it broke through the bone at the back of their heads covered in blood and pinkish beige bits of brain. Messy. Kurama remarked as the two men fell to the ground with dull thumps. Meh. Naruto shrugged and stepped over the two corpses. Stuff like this happens all the time where I come from. Where you come from isn't exactly the nicest place. I never said it was. The corridor twisted and turned more often than Naruto would have liked. Sometimes it was left, others it was right, some turns were curved, others were sharp and so on. Naruto went around a curved corner and as soon as the corridor straightened out again, he found himself looking at a door that blended in surprisingly well with the surrounding walls. End of the corridor, just like that guy said. He mused as he turned to doorknob before pushing the door open. The other side wasn't any different, the same wooden walls with paintings were still there, the same concrete was beneath his feet and it was just as well. Further down though, there were a set of iron bars along with a familiar human and a little girl kneeling in front of him, seemingly paying very close attention. And there are places like Australia, they have these animals called kangaroos, Sukun was saying, and the girl listened to very one of his words. Naruto smiled in relief as the human seemed to be fine, some tattered clothes, but fine overall. Hey Sukun. Naruto called, getting said teen to look at him in surprise as he stopped speaking to the brown-haired girl. Naruto-san. How did you find me? Who knows? Naruto replied as he stopped at the iron bars and leaned on them. So, are you having fun all locked up? Well, it hasn't been that bad, actually. Sukun replied, getting an arched eyebrow from the blonde. I've spoken to her the entire time and it took my mind off things. Alright. Naruto shrugged and a kunai popped into existence, getting an interested look from the girl. He channeled his wind chakra into the blade before slicing at the iron bars and cutting it until the inside of where he'd cut came loose. He grabbed the bars and tossed them to the side, revealing a large empty square for them to get through. He performed a bow with an over-dramatic gesture of his hands as a way of telling them to exit. Come on through, sir and madam, the rescue team is here to get you to safety. Sukun resisted the urge to roll his eyes as he stepped out, eagerly followed by the small girl. Where are Moka-san and Karumu-chan? Naruto glanced at Sukun. We got split up. He answered as they began making their way back down the way Naruto had come. I can still sense them though, so they're still alive, at least. We'll go get them, get out of here and enjoy the rest of our vacation. But what about Sukun gestured to the small girl walking beside him with a smile on her face. Ah, right Naruto murmured. Well we can't exactly look after her, so maybe we can hand her over to the authorities or something. No need. Sukun looked ahead again as Naruto opened the door and gestured them through before closing it. We just need to find the guy that brought me here, that's her father. Either the brown-haired child didn't hear them, which was highly unlikely, or she didn't care what they were talking about. Is that who he was talking about before I confronted him? Naruto mused. Well, we're in luck then, because he's near the front of this place. The corridors twisted and turned again, only in the opposite direction, and the walls and paintings became a blur that didn't get much attention paid to them. Soon enough Naruto found himself back in the room with a compass painted on the roof. Before anyone could make a comment, Moka and Kurumu stepped out of the corridors that had the letters W and N above them respectively. There was some blood splattered on their clothes in minuscule amounts, but he guessed that it wasn't theirs. Have fun? Naruto asked as their small group formed a small circle. He didn't get a reaction from Kurumu, but Moka sneered at him. She was still unhappy with him, it seemed. Hardly. She scoffed, crossing her arms and giving her a look that said I'm better than you in every single way. He pulled out the rosary he'd stuffed in his pocket and held it out, and she snatched it from him. I expect a well-thought-out apology and a lot of blood. He scratched the back of his head. When would that be due in? It's not homework. A clink. Later and the pink-haired side of the vampire returned. She wobbled on her feet before falling forward. Naruto caught her and shifted her body until she was held bridal style. Well, come on, let's hurry up and get the hell out of here. When they had started walking down the corridor with an S above it, Sukun looked at the blonde. Is there something I should know about? About what? About why you owe Moka-san an apology and a lot of blood. It's a long story. Sukun decided to drop the subject as it seemed he didn't want to talk about it. They arrived back in the room that housed the man who had captured Sukun. Said fake psychiatrist was lying down on the black leather couch, his hands held behind his head as a makeshift pillow with a cigarette in his mouth. When he heard footsteps, he turned his head towards them, and his eyes nearly shot out of his head when he saw his daughter grasping Tsukun's hand with his own. That's. Dottie fumbled off the couch and made his way over to the girl until he was on one knee in front of her. He disregarded everyone else, he didn't even seem to show a hint of recognition when he saw Sukun. There wasn't any ill intent coming from the man that engulfed the girl in a bone-crushing hug that she was all too eager to give back, even if she didn't know who he was, so Naruto gestured everyone away. Alright, job done. Now let's get the hell out of her or, maybe not. They'd made it to the bottom of the steel stairs when the words left his mouth, footsteps could be heard coming from the corridor they'd just exited. Who else could be here? Kurumu asked and Sukun frowned, there wasn't exactly many people it could be. As the human had predicted, the same crazed woman stepped into their view, her running shoes stopping dead on the point where the carpet met concrete. The grin that Sukun had seen on her before was still there, but there seemed to some sort of glee in it, as if she wanted this to happen. Held firmly in her hands were the same weapons that Naruto had seen those two men with mops for hair use. A family reunion, how wonderful. The fake psychiatrist put his daughter behind him and backed up towards the leather couch, the girl was all too ready to get away from the woman. Naruto inched closer to the father and daughter duo, as the woman's eyes seemed to be locked on them. Look lady, I'm on vacation and you're ruining it. Is that right? She mused aloud, her fingers twitching on the triggers. Well maybe you should tell someone who actually cares about your vacation. She brought her arms up and aimed her right gun at the girl who was hiding behind her father's legs, while the other was pointed straight at Sukun's head. As soon as she did, two kunai burst into existence, held firmly in Naruto's hands. Wow, would you look at that, it looks like something I'd see in my dreams. Sure. Naruto replied, ignoring the baffled look the fake psychiatrist was giving him. You've got one warning. And you've got two choices with 10 seconds to decide from when I say so. She interrupted, grin widening. You either let your friend live, or you let that girl and man live. And I say so now. Naruto gritted his teeth together. Sure, he'd been able to stop the bullets that the man he'd killed had shot at him, but even then it was extremely difficult and was only one at a time. He'd put up a lot of confidence in front of the two, but in the end he would rather not go up against the weapons another time. 7. Just kill the woman. Kurama drawled. But if I do that she could shoot both Sukun and that girl. 5. And if you don't then one of them is going to die anyway. 3. Before the number 2 could come out of her mouth, Naruto made his decision and sent both of his kunai flying towards the woman's throat. With a startled yelp, the woman instinctively took a step back, but it did nothing in the end. When the weapons were mere inches away from her, she pulled the trigger on one of her guns. She didn't know which one as her attention was on the kunai that had just tore through her jugular, followed soon after by the other one. Sukun stared wide-eyed at the display. It had happened so quick he'd barely been able to see it with his own eyes, and yet it had happened, the proof being the woman on the floor gurgling on her own blood and the man who'd captured him holding his right shoulder where the bullet had traveled into. He grabbed the wound with his left hand and let out a short pained grunt before falling onto the couch. His daughter sat beside him and actually looked worried, which surprised Sukun since from what he knew she didn't even know the man. Well, that worked out better than I'd hoped. Naruto remarked as the woman stopped gurgling and her body went lax. He started walking over to the injured man. Well then, better get this guy to a hospital, can't leave him to die just after he gets to see his daughter, can we? So this part ends here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so quickly like this video for second part of this series. And comment down below your thoughts about this series. And now it's time for me to go, bye.